Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell and I'm your host. Today our guest is Tom Lymbery. Tom is from Grey Creek Store, Grey Creek, BC, right on beautiful Kootenay Lake. Tom is the author of two historical books that have great significance for our region. Tom's Grey Creek Volume 1, Tom's Grey Creek Volume 2. Tom, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here today. You've got two volumes out. The new volume just came out. What's the difference between the two?
Okay, the first volume goes from 1911, when my dad came from England to grow fruit, and to 1945. And then the second volume goes from 1946 to 1980.
So, Tom, you were born in Grey Creek, what year?
1928.
So that makes you, what, 88 years old?
88, yeah.
So you've seen a lot of history come and go in the Kootenay Lake area.
Because we were on the only road across Canada for many, many years. The big sternwheeler, the Nasukin, was built by the Canadian Pacific Railway to run from Kootenay Landing to Nelson daily.
Right.
And when the CPR completed the rail track on the west side of Kootenay Lake, that sternwheeler was not needed anymore.
I see. Now I understand that sternwheeler actually came in right into Grey Creek. Is that correct?
Oh yes, right.
So do you remember it arriving?
Oh yeah, my sister and I used to have to run the phone messages every day to the sternwheeler captain and also to the Greyhound drivers. There would be a daily Greyhound that also brought us their mail. That Greyhound was on its way from Nelson to Calgary.
So, Tom, this wasn't just any ordinary boat. Can you just describe the sternwheeler a little bit for me?
Now, I think, hope many people have been to Caslo to see the Moye.
Yes.
Now, the Nasukin was almost 3 times as big.
Okay.
Big enough, 30 feet across the bow, big enough to park a smaller Greyhound. These were just 35-passenger Greyhounds.
So you're talking about a bus on the deck?
Yes. And
wow,
of the 16 years that they took the daily bus across the ferry, they never had any sort of accident. And that sternwheeler it was a bit rough going around Cape Horn because our Grey Creek is in a big bay that's about 7 miles long. We're a mile inside the bay, and the boat going across would have to go from Grey Creek to Balfour, out around the point where the waves sometimes cross.
Right. So, Tom, you're the proprietor. I know your family now is basically running your store for you. You've stepped back just a little bit. Grey Creek Store is sort of one of those iconic stops in the Kootenays. Tell me what makes your store so unique.
Well, we stocked everything we needed. It was too far. It was quite a ways from businesses where we needed supplies. So my dad always tried to sell unusual things. And because we had people waiting for the ferry, we had built-in customers for years, too. So my dad stocked unusual things like Roman coins, which a lot of people thought were replicas.
Okay. So I can only attest to the fact that when you walk in your store, there's something unique around every corner. So it's from coins to chainsaws. There's a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about your book. 200 stories or accounts in each book. A tremendous amount of illustrations and photos. Tom, tell us about the process of putting together these two volumes.
Okay, the writing the book is no problem because I've been writing stories for 25 years for our local newspaper. So I just have to recollect some of those and put them together. But the pictures, we're very fortunate to have a professional book designer in Boswell, just south of Grey Creek, Warren Clark, and he's designed a lot of books, and he does the setup. A lot of this is his design, and then he can also improve these black and white pictures.
I see.
That can be improved enormously. You see many books where the pictures are not very clear, but they can be done.
Yeah, you're talking about the production value on your books, Tom. I have to say they're very well done, professionally put together, easy to read, and as you mentioned, the illustrations really stand out. They tell a story in themselves.
Yeah, well,
do you have an idea how many photos you have in each book?
Well, this
I would say hundreds. Is that correct?
This one has. I did count them in the book one, and it has 205 previously unpublished photos.
Okay, so a real treasure trove of local history.
And our Francis Roback who lives in Grey Creek, worked 30 years at the Glenbow Museum in Calgary.
Okay.
And she's the one who's done the editing and written most of the captions and the sidebars.
Right. So Tom, just talk a little bit about Grey Creek and the area. Even give people a little bit of a geography lesson. What area are we talking about exactly?
Well, Kootenay Lake is the largest ice-free lake in Canada, and it was also the feature. It was the only Western Canadian lake in the program called Great Canadian Lakes. I don't know whether sometimes that turns up on TV.
Okay.
I'm in that program for about 30 seconds.
I see. Okay.
Telling about the lost gold boulder.
Okay. So as you leave Creston, you drive up along Kootenay Lake. You can see the lake to your left, of course, Grey Creek, and then you come to Crawford Bay.
Crawford Bay, Kootenay Springs Golf Course is known to many people. It's very, and of course this second book tells you a lot about the construction of that course, because it was unusual to have a multi-million-dollar course built in a rather isolated area at that time. It's been very successful.
Right. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful course, and sort of one of the signature golf courses in the region. And your area is blessed to have such a great course. So let's just talk about your second book. So when did that come out, Tom?
Second book we published last fall in 2016. Came out in October, and this is 100 pages, more than 100 pages more than book one. It took us 3 years to get it finished, and Frances Roback, who did the editing, and we do have her name on the cover. I couldn't get her name on the first one, but I did manage to make sure she's acknowledged on the second one.
Good. Now, Tom, you've seen changes. You mentioned the fact that it was sort of an isolated location for many years. It seems like it's pretty busy these days with visiting tourists. Is that correct? It
wasn't quite so isolated, really, because the only road across Canada went through, and the ferry had to come to the ferry, and that started from 1931 to 1947.
What changed then?
Then they extended the road to Kootenay Bay, which they had originally intended to do, and put on new ferry in service, and then Asukin became surplus and was bought by the city of Nelson for the Sea Cadet Corps, and then it got loose and sank. So then after that it was sold to a scrap dealer who I interviewed extensively. There's quite a few of his pictures in the book as well.
Right. So I can just imagine those big stern wheelers, going across the lake. It must have been a majestic sight.
Well, when that boat was built, it was the largest stern wheeler in Canada, in even San Francisco or the Yukon. 4 decks. It was designed with 100 cabins because it was designed to go daily from Kootenay Landing. The rail line came to Kootenay Landing on Kootenay Lake in 1898, and there was no connection between that and Proctor. So the sternwheeler took the passengers and express to Nelson, came back the next day with the eastbound.
I see, yeah. So in I think it was 63, things changed a little bit. What happened then?
62, the Rogers Pass opened.
Okay.
And it was like somebody put a gate across our highway. Okay. Because the Greyhound service we had at that time, Greyhound was the rails were not attracting passengers anymore. People were traveling Greyhound. That not everybody had a car like they did today. We had 4 eastbound, 4 westbound Greyhound, and they would be often triple header with 3 buses.
I see. So what you're talking about is the establishment of the Trans-Canada Highway through Rogers Pass. And then south of you also there was something that impacted Grey Creek. What was that?
Yeah, well, the Creston-Selma Road was completed, and at that point we lost our Greyhound.
What year was that?
And that was October of 1963.
Okay. So lots of changes then that brought to the community and so forth. How do you think the communities have coped over the years? Have you seen creative ways to adapt to that sort of loss in traffic?
Yeah, well, tourism is still a very important business, and golf and that sort of area. A very interesting operation on Kootenay Lake is Tahara Ashram. That's a much bigger operation than you realize. They are currently rebuilding the Temple of Light, which is visible from the ferry. We had a tour of this on Saturday, and it's quite something. And that's
Okay, Tom, let's also just talk about your family. So it was originally started by your father, is that correct?
Yeah.
And when did he come to Kootenay Lake?
He came to Kootenay Lake in 1911.
Okay.
And at that time, a lot of Europeans were being drawn to Canada with the promise that with 5 to 10 acres would allow you to plant your fruit trees and enjoy fishing and hunting while they were growing, and then you could spend a bit of time. And even Cranbrook, Kootenay orchards, they were selling these 10-acre lots in Vermeer all over.
So it was quite popular in the Kootenays.
Yeah, and of course,
a little bit of a promotional scheme in Britain, right?
But on the other hand, the cherries did very well. The cherries were a cash crop that carried us through the 40s, the 30s, and the Depression years.
So we're going to wrap this up in a few minutes here, Tom, but I know that you have a passion for Grey Creek Pass. Can you just talk a little bit about Grey Creek Pass?
When the Cominco and the West Kootenay Power, when they reopened the Bluebell mine at Riandel in 1951, and that part of this was because the price of lead went up because of the Korean War. And so they needed power, so they built the longest power span in the world across Kootenay Lake, 2 miles of power span. Nobody had ever tried that before.
And that still exists today, right?
And it's still in use, yes. Yeah. And then they built a power line to supply Kimberley. Kimberley didn't have enough power, and Kimberley was going into the fertilizer business as well, along with the mine. So that road was a strictly 4-wheel drive. It was a toughie to build, but you could get through it with a Volkswagen or 4-wheel drive, but not anything else. And then Kootenay Springs, of course, and everybody else, because a lot of the people that worked at Riandel were transferred from Kimberley, they had relatives there, so we had different organizations. Rose or Gray, There's Gotta Be a Way, was one of them. And so finally they did build the road in 1990. They built it's a 6,800-foot summit, but it's passable by any type of vehicle as long as there's no snow. It's open from usually the 1st of July to the end of October.
Right. So I know it's a popular road for a lot of outdoor people and so forth. So who knows, maybe they'll upgrade it even more in the future.
It's part of the Trans-Canada Trail, which is going to be officially this year. It opens, and we have a trail crew that's extending some of this so people don't have to cycle along the highway, for instance.
So Grey Creek Store had a significant milestone anniversary recently. I think you were celebrating 100 years, is that correct?
This year it's 104 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So not too many businesses can say that they've had that kind of legacy in the Kootenays. So just tell me who's operating the store. How's it been going lately?
Well, my son has a business, his own business in Spokane, but he comes up every couple of weeks, and he's the chief. And he's very good at finding good employees. But we have a very good local manager. She's worked for us for nearly 25 years. And it's interesting, the changes that made. We sold insurance, including ICBC, for 40 years. Finally sold that part of the business. It got too much to handle everything else.
If I recall, I came into your store one day and you were signing a marriage license for someone. That was part of your service as well.
Well, I'm still a notary. I'm a appointed notary public, which means I'm authorized to certify signatures, and that's what I was doing at that time.
Right. So Tom, thank you again for being a guest here on Talking Kootenay Books. Your 2 books, 2 volumes, give us a great insight into the history of our region, Kootenay Lake in particular. Is there a volume 3 is the question?
No, I don't, not in this type of series. I may come out with a smaller book about a specific, for instance, riding the Kettle Valley Railway or something like that.
Good for you. Tremendous read and a tremendous amount of research. Congratulations, Tom.
And they're going to continue to be available. History books need to be in print. This is our second printing. And we may go to a second printing of this one at some point. But
so I've asked the other authors what the reaction has been to their book. What about your 2 books, Tom? What do people like about your books?
Well, I can't believe people keep coming. Even Saturday we were at a concert at the Ashram, and somebody buttonholed me and wanted to know more about the Little Grey Home in the West, which was a very popular song that was written many years ago. And it was written by somebody who lived in Grey Creek. So,
right. Well, thank you, Tom. We appreciate you being our guest. The books, Volume 1, Volume 2, Tom's Grey Creek, the history of Grey Creek and a lot of the West Kootenay's Kootenay Lake memoirs and history. So a job well done, an enjoyable read. It would be an asset, or it was certainly an advantage to everyone to have one of these books in their library, because it talks so much about the local history. Congratulations, Tom. And this has been Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell. Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell. I'm your host, and I'm pleased today to introduce our guest, Stan Chung. Stan, great to have you here today. Thanks for joining us on Talking Kootenay Books.
Nice to be here, Keith.
So, Stan, you've recently published your second book, is that correct?
That's right.
What was the first one called?
Global Citizen.
Okay. And the new book is called?
I Held My Breath for a Year.
Okay. So when I had an opportunity to read through your book, I found that there were a lot of poignant experiences, accounts about your family, about your life. I thought you really portrayed the characters and sort of the trauma and the drama that went with it. How is it that you're able to capture that in a chapter in a book?
How is it? Well, it's sort of like taking a knife and cutting your wrist and having the blood flow all over.
Okay.
It's a lot about vulnerability. It's about pain. It's about how to figure out how to get through some of these moments.
Right.
And many of these things that I write about, I've never really figured out until I tried to write about it.
Right.
So I appreciate the remark about the poignancy. I'm trying really hard to tell the truth.
Right. So I understand that these came as an inspiration from columns that you've written over the years. What is it like to be a columnist? Is it different than, say, maybe a novelist, or do you see any difference there?
I've tried both. A column is a little bit different because there are no excuses on the deadline. There's a deadline, and you have to produce no matter how you feel.
Right.
So sometimes I'm writing an hour before the deadline, and it's not the greatest work, and sometimes I've got more space to do it. But I think I've been writing a steady column now for 20 years, so it's pretty much a ritual in the way that I live.
Sure. So let's talk about your inspiration when it comes to putting these columns down. Where do you seek inspiration? How is it that you're motivated to do this on a regular basis?
Well, one of the things that I try to do is I focus on my own contradictions, or as I like to say, my own hypocrisy. So there are lots of things that we do. We just can't believe that we can do both things at the same time. How can you believe in the environment, and then how can you also drive a car? And I feel I have so many of these hypocrisies. So I like to write about that, because I think other people are also wondering, how do you live your life, especially in a modern world where you try to do the right thing, but you don't know if you really can make a difference.
Right. So many of those messages come through in your columns and your chapters in the book. So when you sit down to write a column, do you have a concept or an idea in mind, or does it sort of come to you as you get into the process? How does that work?
It works in 1,000 different ways, because you can't rely on one process.
Okay.
You can't rely on one place. You can't rely on your desk or your family. It's different every time. You have a deadline. A lot of times I'm approaching a blank piece of paper, and I've got a couple hours and I've got to produce.
Okay. So let's explore your title of the book, I Held My Breath for a Year. What's the significance of the title?
Last year, I remembered something that happened to me when I was very young. I was in grade 8 at Anne Stevenson Junior Secondary in Williams Lake, BC. And I remembered something really for the first time. So it's probably 40 years old.
Okay.
And I remembered that something happened to me where I held my breath for a year. And I wondered about that boy and how he grew up. How did he forget that? And sometimes we bury our traumas. We bury those things that affect us most deeply. So I couldn't believe that I didn't remember this. And I titled the book after this because I think there are many people who also have those memories that are below the surface.
Sure. Stan, if you wouldn't mind, would you read a short excerpt for us?
Sure.
So I had the opportunity and the pleasure to listen to you read at the event that was sponsored by Lotus Books, Beers and Books, and I was really impressed with the fact that you know your columns, your chapters, just really bring to life what you're describing. There's humor in some of them. There's a lot of emotion that is captured. So I just thought maybe you could read a short excerpt for us.
Sure, I'd love to. I'm just pretending that I have a deck of cards here, and I'll just flip through and find something. Maybe something about being a parent.
Okay.
So this piece is called Growing Up Before Our Children Do, and I'll just read a paragraph.
Okay.
The bruise on my mother's thigh is the color of a prairie sunset and as big as my fist. He's hurt her again. I think I am only 11 years old, wrist bones like a bird. I pledge in my heart that my father will not hurt her again. I lay awake at night, promising the stars a double-barreled blast of vengeance.
So Stan, I have to say the emotion of your stories are very strong.
Thank you.
And they come out very clearly. Why is it? Why is it that your emotions are so raw that you're able to convey those so effectively?
Well, that's a really hard question, Keith. I think I grew up in Canada. I was born in Korea. We Koreans are pretty buttoned up, just like Canadians are.
Yes.
I grew up in a Canadian culture, where you didn't really talk about your feelings very much. I grew up with parents that didn't talk about how they felt.
Right.
And I think that's not right.
Right.
I think it's important for us to learn how to express ourselves, particularly the things that are tough to talk about.
Right.
And I wanted to raise my children that way. I wanted to teach that way. I wanted to be a kind of person that could talk about emotion, even though it's really difficult. I think it's really important. And I think as writers, we have an obligation to talk about what's in your heart.
Right. And to your credit, I think you've really done that in many, many of your stories. So it is quite commendable that that emotion comes through, and it really captures, I think, the essence
Thank you.
of not only relationships but also the significance of what you're trying to say. I think you've done an excellent job there. So Stan, any plans for future books?
Well, I'm always writing, so thinking a lot about how great it is to live in the East Kootenays.
Right.
So thinking about setting something here, perhaps something of a genre nature,
Right.
maybe even detective.
I see.
So thinking about fiction quite a bit, as well as keeping up the column.
Great. Well, congratulations. It's been a pleasure to have you as a guest on Talking Kootenay Books today. Thank you for taking the time and being here and sharing your book with us. And the book is I Held My Breath for a Year. My name is Keith Powell, and this has been Talking Kootenay Books.